August 8th, 1941. The sun is already climbing over Belyaevka, a village outside Odessa, and the heat will be unbearable by midday. A young woman lies motionless in a shallow depression, her Mosin Nagant rifle extended in front of her, the stock pressed against her shoulder. She has been in this position for 3 hours. Her body aches. Sweat runs down her back beneath the uniform that still feels foreign against her skin. She was a university student 27 days ago. Through her scope, she watches 2 Romanian soldiers moving carelessly between defensive positions. They believe they are safe here. They are wrong. She steadies her breathing, lets the crosshairs settle, and squeezes the trigger. The crack of the rifle shatters the morning silence. One man drops. The second freezes, confused, searching for the source of the shot. She has already worked the bolt. The second shot follows 6 seconds later. 2 kills. Her first. She does not feel what she expected to feel. There is no triumph, no horror, only the immediate need to move, because counterfire is already snapping through the grass around her position. She crawls backward, dragging her rifle, tasting dirt and smoke. This is the beginning. When Germany launched Operation Barbarossa on June 22, 1941, Lyudmila Mikhailovna Pavlichenko was 24 years old, a history student at Kiev University with a young son and a failed marriage already behind her. She had learned to shoot as a teenager in a WWII club, a Soviet program that trained civilians in military skills, and she was good at it. Very good. Sharpshooting gave her something that studying medieval history and navigating the chaos of single motherhood did not: control, precision, measurable success. When the Wehrmacht tore through Soviet defenses and Kiev came under threat, she made her way to a Red Army recruiting office. They looked at her and saw a young woman. They suggested she become a nurse. She informed them she was a marksman and had come to fight. To prove it, she demanded a rifle and a test. They gave her both. She qualified. Within days, she was assigned to the 25th Rifle Division as a sniper and sent south to defend Odessa, a vital port city on the Black Sea that the Axis powers desperately wanted to capture. The siege of Odessa began in early August. Romanian forces, supported by German units, pressed against Soviet defenses in brutal heat and across open terrain. This was not the war of rapid mechanized advances that had devastated Soviet forces further north. This was attrition, trench raids, artillery duels, snipers hunting snipers. The conditions were perfect for what Lyudmila had trained to do. Snipers in the Red Army did not operate alone in the early months of the war. They worked in pairs, sometimes in small groups, moving between forward positions and no man's land, taking shots of opportunity, then relocating before enemy artillery could zero in. Every kill required a witness, usually a spotter or an officer, who would confirm the shot and record it. Without confirmation, the kill did not count. This was not bureaucracy for its own sake. In a war where propaganda and morale mattered as much as bullets, the Red Army needed verifiable proof of success. Snipers who could demonstrate consistent results received better equipment, greater autonomy, and were held up as examples to inspire others. Lyudmila understood this immediately. She kept her own count. She noted distances, conditions, the weapons her targets carried. She learned which positions offered the best lines of sight, where shadows fell at different times of day, how to read wind by watching grass and dust. She learned to stay still when every instinct screamed to move. She learned to shoot when exhausted, when hungry, when the person in her scope was doing something that made them seem human. Lighting a cigarette, reading a letter, laughing at something a comrade said. By the time Soviet forces evacuated Odessa in mid-October, a strategic withdrawal to avoid encirclement, She had been credited with 187 confirmed kills in just over 2 months. This was an extraordinary number. Most snipers, even skilled ones, might achieve a fraction of that in the same period. But Odessa had been a target-rich environment. Romanian and German forces had been overconfident, careless in their movements, and Soviet snipers had exploited every mistake. The evacuation took the defenders across the Black Sea to Sevastopol, a fortress city on the Crimean Peninsula that would become one of the longest and bloodiest sieges of the entire war. If Odessa had been brutal, Sevastopol was something else entirely. The Germans knew what was coming. They brought in heavy siege artillery, elite assault troops, and their own sniper units specifically trained to hunt Soviet marksmen who had become notorious during the earlier fighting. Lyudmila's reputation had preceded her. She was no longer just another sniper. She was a known threat. German and Romanian intelligence had begun circulating descriptions of Soviet snipers causing disproportionate casualties, and her name appeared in intercepted communications. Some soldiers later claimed that German troops referred to her in crude, fearful terms, calling her a Russian bitch from hell, though whether this was an official designation or simply the kind of bitter slang that soldiers use when they are afraid is unclear. What is clear is that she had become a priority target. Counter-sniper operations are a battle of patience and deception. The hunter becomes the hunted. Every shot Lyudmila took revealed her position to observers who were trained to find her. She began encountering enemy snipers who were as skilled as she was, who understood the same principles of concealment and firing discipline. They set traps. They used decoys, helmets on sticks, dummy positions designed to draw fire. They watched for the glint of a scope, the disturbed dust from a muzzle blast, any mistake that would give her away. She made mistakes. In late November, she took a shot from a position she had used before. A German sniper had been waiting. The return fire was immediate. The bullet struck the dirt 2 inches from her head, showering her face with debris and leaving her partially deaf in one ear for days. She crawled out of that position, knowing she had been careless. Carelessness killed people. She did not allow herself to be careless again. The siege ground on through the winter. The Germans launched assault after assault, each one preceded by artillery bombardments that turned sections of Sevastopol into rubble. Soviet defenders lived underground, emerging to fight, and then retreating into tunnels and bunkers when the shelling became too intense. Supplies ran low. Ammunition was rationed. Snipers received priority for ammunition. Each round was too valuable to waste. But even that began to dwindle. In early June 1942, the Germans launched their final offensive against Sevastopol. The city was surrounded. There would be no reinforcements. The Red Army defenders knew they were fighting for time, nothing more, hoping to tie down German forces that were needed elsewhere on the Eastern Front. On June 10th, Lyudmila was moving between positions when mortar fire erupted around her. She does not remember the explosion that hit close enough to lift her off the ground. She remembers waking up in pain, her face and body lacerated by shrapnel, blood soaking through her uniform. She was dragged to an aid station, treated by medics who worked under fire, and expected her to die. She did not die, but her combat service was over. The Red Army evacuated her by submarine, one of the last vessels to escape before Sevastopol fell on July 4th. By that time, her confirmed kill count stood at 309. This made her the most successful female sniper in recorded military history, and one of the most effective snipers, male or female, to serve in World War II. She was 25 years old. She had been in combat for less than a year, but the war was not done with her yet. The Soviet Union had been desperate for international support since the German invasion. Stalin needed the Western Allies to open a second front in Europe to relieve pressure on Soviet forces, To build public sympathy and political pressure in the West, the Soviet government sent delegations of war heroes on publicity tours. In the fall of 1942, Lyudmila Pavlichenko was selected to travel to the United States and Canada as part of a Soviet youth delegation. She arrived in America in late August, still recovering from her wounds, and was immediately thrust into a media environment unlike anything she had experienced. American journalists were fascinated by her. A female sniper who had killed more than 300 enemy soldiers was an irresistible story. But the questions they asked revealed a profound disconnect between the war she had fought and the one they imagined. They asked about her appearance. They asked if Soviet women were allowed to wear makeup in combat. They asked if her uniform made her look feminine. They wanted to know if she had a boyfriend, if she planned to marry, if killing men had made her less of a woman. One reporter asked if she had learned to shoot because Soviet men were poor marksmen. Another suggested that her story must be exaggerated, that surely the Red Army was inflating her numbers for propaganda purposes. She tolerated these questions for several weeks. Then, during a speech at a rally in Chicago, she stopped tolerating them. Speaking through an interpreter, she addressed the crowd directly. "Gentlemen," she said, "I am 25 years old, and I have killed 309 fascist occupants by now. Don't you think, gentlemen, that you have been hiding behind my back for too long?" The statement was widely reported. It was blunt, confrontational, and devastatingly effective. It reframed the conversation. She was not a curiosity. She was a soldier from a nation that had been bleeding for more than a year, while the United States debated how and when to commit forces to Europe. Her presence was a reminder of what was at stake. She met Eleanor Roosevelt, the First Lady, who invited her to stay at the White House. The two women formed an unlikely friendship. Roosevelt was 57, a skilled political operator who understood power and used it carefully. Pavlichenko was half her age, blunt to the point of rudeness, and deeply uncomfortable with the performative aspects of diplomacy. But Roosevelt saw something in her that transcended politics, exhaustion, grief, and a kind of quiet rage at the waste of it all. They corresponded for years afterward. Pavlichenko traveled across the United States, giving speeches at rallies, universities, and union halls. She spoke about the siege of Sevastopol, about the soldiers she had served with, about what it meant to fight a war of survival against an enemy that intended to erase her people. She did not romanticize combat. She did not portray herself as a hero. She described what she had seen and done with a directness that made audiences uncomfortable, which was precisely the point. By the time she returned to the Soviet Union in early 1943, the political landscape had shifted. The Allies had opened fronts in North Africa and were planning the invasion of Italy. The Soviet victory at Stalingrad in February 1943 had turned the tide on the Eastern Front. The Red Army was no longer retreating. It was advancing. Lyudmila never returned to combat. Her wounds had healed, but the Red Army had other uses for her. She was too valuable as a symbol and too experienced as a tactician to risk losing in the field. She was assigned to train other snipers, passing on the techniques and discipline that had kept her alive. She taught young men and women how to control their breathing, how to calculate wind drift, how to choose firing positions and know when to abandon them. She taught them how to think like their enemy, how to predict movement and exploit mistakes. She taught them that sniping was not about bravery or marksmanship alone. It was about patience, preparation, and the willingness to do a necessary thing that most people could not do. After the war, she completed her degree in history at Kiev University. She worked for the Soviet Navy as a historian and researcher. She raised her son. She lived quietly, avoiding the spotlight when she could, though the Soviet government continued to hold her up as an example of Soviet heroism and gender equality. She was awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union, the nation's highest honor, and received numerous other decorations. But she did not talk much about the war, not in the way that people wanted her to. When asked about her experiences, she spoke in facts and numbers, in tactical details and confirmed kills. She did not speak about how it felt. Perhaps she did not have words for that. Perhaps she understood that people who had not been there could not understand, and people who had been there did not need to ask. She died on October 10th, 1974, at the age of 58. The cause of death was listed as a stroke, but those who knew her said she had never fully recovered from the wounds she received at Sevastopol. She was buried with full military honors at WWII Cemetery in Moscow. There are aspects of her story that are difficult to reconcile. She killed 309 people. Each of those people had a name, a family, a life that ended because she was better at her job than they were at theirs. Some of them were committed fascists who believed in the ideology they fought for. Some of them were conscripts who had no choice. All of them died because of decisions made by men in distant cities who would never be held accountable for the consequences. Lyudmila Pavlichenko did not start the war. She did not choose the terms of it. But she fought in it with a skill and determination that saved lives on her side by taking lives on the other. This is the nature of war. It does not reward moral complexity. It rewards effectiveness, and she was devastatingly effective. What makes her story matter, decades after the last shot was fired, is not the body count. It is not the medals or the speeches or the propaganda value. What matters is that she was an ordinary person who was forced into an extraordinary situation and made choices that most people never have to make. She lived with those choices for the rest of her life. She carried the weight of them in silence. There are monuments to her now, statues and plaques in Russia and Ukraine, streets named in her honor, a postage stamp issued decades after her death. These are the ways we try to remember, to acknowledge, to make sense of something that defies easy sense-making. But monuments do not capture the reality. They do not show the 3-hour wait in the dirt outside Belyaevka. They do not show the mortar blast that ended her combat service, or the years of chronic pain that followed. They do not show the young men and women she trained, some of whom died in the same way her enemies had died, quickly from a distance, by someone who never knew their name. She was 24 years old when the war came to her doorstep. She was 25 when she left the battlefield. The rest of her life was defined by that single year of violence, even as she tried to build something else from the wreckage. War makes demands on people that no one should have to meet. It asks them to do things that will haunt them forever. And when the war ends, it offers no answers, no resolution, no clean ending. It simply stops, and the people who survived have to find a way to keep living. Lyudmila Pavlichenko did that. She found a way. But she never pretended it was easy. She never pretended the cost was worth it. She simply endured. And in enduring, she became something more than a soldier or a statistic or a symbol. She became a reminder of what war actually is. Not glory, not heroism, not the stories we tell to make it bearable. Just people trying to survive in a world that has become unrecognizable, making choices they wish they never had to make, and carrying those choices long after the fighting stops. That is what we remember. That is what we should remember. Not the kills, not the numbers, but the weight, the cost, the price that someone paid so that others might not have to, and the knowledge that, if we are not careful, history will ask that price again.